The moment the Marine's boots echoed through the sterile hospital corridor, every heartbeat in the ward seemed to pause. His uniform was dust-stained, his face marked with exhaustion and pain, yet his eyes burned with a fierce determination that cut through the cold white walls. Nurses froze mid-step, doctors glanced up from their charts, and patients stirred in their beds. Something heavy had entered the room, something unfinished. And in the center of it all stood a young nurse named Grace Holloway, her hands trembling around a clipboard, her past pounding at the doors of her present, about to be forced into the light. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of truth, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that need hope the most. Grace had built her life on silence. For years, she had hidden behind quiet professionalism, gentle smiles, and tireless dedication. At St. Matthew's Medical Center in a small town in Texas, she was known as the nurse who never complained, who volunteered for extra shifts, and who sat with dying patients long after visiting hours ended. Few knew anything about her life before the hospital, and those who tried to ask were met with polite deflection. Grace carried her history like a locked chest deep inside her, buried under layers of duty and compassion. She believed that if she worked hard enough, cared deeply enough, and stayed invisible enough, the past would never find her. But the past had a way of tracking down even the most hidden souls. The Marine, Sergeant Caleb Walker, had arrived 3 days earlier, airlifted from a training accident that had shattered his leg and bruised his lungs. He was known among the staff as disciplined, distant, and painfully observant. Though quiet, his eyes missed nothing. During his long, restless nights in the hospital bed, he had watched Grace move through the ward, noticed the way her shoulders stiffened whenever military uniforms passed, the way she avoided the television when war footage appeared, and the faint scar on her wrist she tried so hard to hide beneath her sleeves. Something about her unsettled him, stirring memories he had fought to bury. Years ago, before the battlefield hardened him, Caleb had known a different world. A world of foster homes, whispered secrets, and one brave girl who had protected him when no one else would. He remembered her courage, her haunted eyes, and the way she disappeared one night without a trace. For years, he had wondered if she had survived the chaos they'd grown up in. And now, lying in a hospital bed, he felt that same presence near him, like a familiar melody playing just beyond reach. Grace tried to avoid his room, trading shifts and rerouting her rounds whenever possible. But fate, relentless and cruel, placed her there again and again. Each time, Caleb watched her more closely, piecing together fragments until the truth began to take shape. He recognized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, the faint tremor in her hands when someone raised their voice, the sadness behind her soft smile. These were not coincidences. They were echoes. The day everything shattered was quiet, heavy with the smell of antiseptic and rain. Storm clouds pressed against the windows, mirroring the tension building in the ward. Grace entered Caleb's room to check his vitals, her movements efficient but distant. As she reached for the monitor, his voice, low and steady, broke the silence. He said her name, not the name on her badge, but the one she had abandoned long ago. The name only one person from her childhood knew. The world tilted. Grace froze, breath trapped in her chest, heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. For a moment, she considered denying it, pretending she had misheard. But the look in his eyes told her it was already too late. The walls she had built over a decade crumbled in seconds. Memories flooded back, the overcrowded shelters, the hunger, the fear, the nights spent protecting a younger boy from violent outbursts, the promises whispered in the dark that someday, somehow, they would escape. Grace had been barely 16 when she ran, carrying guilt heavier than any bag, convinced that disappearing was the only way to survive. She changed her name, cut ties, and rebuilt herself piece by fragile piece, but the shame and sorrow never truly left. Now, standing in that hospital room, she felt exposed, stripped of every defense. Caleb didn't accuse. He didn't shout. His voice carried only a quiet intensity as he urged her to tell the truth, to the doctors, to the nurses, to herself. He spoke of forgiveness, of how the past only held power when it stayed hidden, of how survival was not something to be ashamed of. Each word pressed against the armor she had worn for so long. Grace tried to walk away, but her legs betrayed her. She sank into a chair, tears blurring the room. Years of bottled grief poured out in silent sobs. She spoke of running from a stepfather who terrorized them, of protecting others when no one protected her, of leaving because staying meant losing herself completely. She confessed how every life she saved in that hospital was her attempt to make up for the one she felt she had abandoned. As she spoke, the storm outside broke, rain lashing against the windows like a release of pent-up emotion. Nurses passing by slowed, sensing something monumental unfolding behind that closed door. By the time Grace finished, her voice was raw, her chest aching, but a strange lightness began to replace the crushing weight she had always carried. Word spread quickly through the hospital. Not in whispers of scandal, but in murmurs of awe. Doctors and nurses who had only known Grace as the quiet, tireless worker now saw her as a survivor, a fighter who had turned pain into purpose. Instead of judgment, she was met with understanding, respect, and unexpected kindness. The hospital administration offered support, counseling, and encouragement, reminding her that her past did not diminish her present, it strengthened it. For the first time, Grace allowed herself to believe them. Caleb's recovery was slow and grueling. Physical therapy pushed him to his limits, and there were days when pain and frustration nearly broke him. Yet Grace remained by his side, not as a ghost from his past, but as a steady presence in his present. Their shared history formed a quiet bond, a reminder that even the most broken beginnings could lead to something meaningful. As weeks turned into months, Grace changed in subtle but profound ways. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and stood taller. The nightmares that once haunted her sleep slowly faded. She began volunteering at shelters for at-risk youth, offering guidance and comfort to those walking the same path she once had. Each story she heard strengthened her resolve to be the voice she never had. Caleb, inspired by her courage, began mentoring troubled teens during his rehabilitation, sharing lessons of discipline, resilience, and hope. Together, they became living proof that survival was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a greater purpose. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the Texas horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Grace stood alone outside the hospital. The air was warm, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. She thought about the girl she used to be, terrified, desperate, and lost, and the woman she had become. For the first time, she felt pride instead of shame. She realized that being forced to reveal her past had not destroyed her. It had freed her. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and it helps spread hope to others who might be struggling in silence. And before this story ends, leave a comment telling us what part moved you the most. Your words might inspire someone who desperately needs encouragement today. Because somewhere out there, someone is hiding their pain, believing they must face it alone. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of truth, one act of courage, to change everything. Grace lifted her face to the fading light, breathing deeply, finally unafraid of who she was. Her story was no longer a secret. It was a testament. A reminder that even in the darkest chapters, hope can survive, waiting patiently for the moment it is allowed to shine.